During the early 2000s, I was incarcerated in the county jail for a crime that I had committed. The details of the crime are not relevant now, but what is important is the experience that I went through. It was my first time being locked up, and the whole ordeal was incredibly daunting and uncomfortable. The prison facility was filled with all kinds of individuals who had committed all manner of crimes. Some were there for minor offenses, while others had committed the most severe crimes imaginable. The environment was tense, and I remember feeling like I was constantly on edge. Every little sound or movement from another inmate would make me jump. It was a challenging time for me, and I had to adjust to a new way of life in order to survive. The daily routine of the prison was monotonous and regimented. Every day was the same. There was no sense of time passing. I spent most of my time in my cell, which was small and cramped. Despite the difficulties, I tried my best to stay positive and focus on my eventual release. I began to read more and write letters to my loved ones outside of prison. These activities helped me to maintain my sanity and cope with the harsh reality of my situation. A particular group of inmates had formed a dominating faction among the prison population. Their presence was always a cause of great concern for me, as they would often prey upon the weaker prisoners. Avoiding their attention was no easy task and required me to constantly stay vigilant and alert. However, despite the challenges, I was able to keep myself hidden from their watchful eyes and avoid becoming a target of their aggression. The water taps in the prison were a bit unique. I would notice the constant stream of steam emanating from them. The water was boiling hot, reaching temperatures of about 190 degrees, and inmates used them as a means to make simple meals for themselves. Without the luxury of kitchen appliances or the option of heating up their food in a microwave, they relied on these taps to cook their meals. On this particular day, I decided to make myself a bowl of soup and was on my way to fetch some water from the tap when I heard a loud scream that made me jump in fright. The suddenness of the scream caught me off guard, and I immediately turned to find its source, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The prison was a place of constant noise, but this was different. The scream had an urgency to it, and it made me feel uneasy. I thought maybe I heard things and the scream would be some inmate just shouting for no reason, so I proceeded to get water. But when I reached there, my eyes landed on a horrifying scene. One of the inmates was lying on the floor screaming in pain, while another, who was part of that scary group, was beating the shit out of him. Initially, I thought it was just a regular fight, but when my eyes fell upon the wet burn mark on the screaming inmate, a sense of terror washed over me. My mind kept telling me to run away and avoid getting seen by that scary man, but my legs were not listening. They had completely frozen in horror. I remember the man slowly raising his head and giving me this cold, dead look as he stopped kicking the other man. And it was so intimidating that I felt I would literally piss my pants. But before anything else could happen, someone called the guards and they rushed inside before taking both of them away. Probably the injured one was taken to a hospital, but I have absolutely no idea where they took the other inmate. A few days passed since that incident, and the environment of the prison had gotten a bit more bearable than it used to be. The injured guy had returned after getting his burns treated, but weirdly enough, I hadn't seen the man who attacked him. Wherever he was taken, he was probably still there. More days passed, and it was the day when I was getting a visit from my lawyer. As they were taking me there, we passed this pathway that looked like a hallway. A few officers were carrying a corpse from the other end. As I passed through, I took a glance at it. Even though the face was covered with a white cloth, there was no mistaking about whose arms I had seen those unique patterns of tattoos on. I didn't know what happened to my fellow inmate, but I remember gulping in fear so hard, and the officer taking me gave me a weird glance. I begged my lawyer the entire time he was there to get me out of this place, but he kept repeating the same sentence. I'm doing everything I can. It was almost as like he was not listening to what I was saying. I was this close to strangling him out of frustration if he were to say that one more time, but I controlled the urge to do that. That evening, when we were eating, I saw the guy who was burned with bandages wrapped around his body. He was laughing and mocking one of the new inmates, For some reason, I couldn't help but feel an evil aura emitting from him. This was strange since he was the victim, but again, I didn't know the complete picture of what transpired there. The cocky smirk on his face as he conversed with one of the dangerous criminals was enough to send shivers down my body. There were two things I was sure of. One, whatever made the other guy pour hot water on this creepy-looking dude, I'm sure he was at fault. And two, I knew I needed to stay as far away from that guy until I got out of this hellhole, even though I wasn't sure what was in store for me for the next 7 years I had to spend here.
The scariest experience I ever had in a forest was when I was about 14 years old. I was the only daughter of my parents and enjoyed a lot of love from them. That incident changed my life completely. I live with my parents in a populated town area with all facilities. My father was working as a bank manager in the main town area. My father was earning enough for us. We also had a piece of land and our farmhouse was there. We often used to go there during my vacations. Our farmhouse was covered with wood all around. There were a few more farmhouses there, but each one was spaced out from one another. Like always, my vacation arrived, and again, my family decided to go to our farmhouse. We packed our stuff and started our trip to our farmhouse. I was a little more excited than my parents because that was one of my favorite places. I used to roam around in the woods late at night without worrying about anything. The whole day was very exhausting for us, so we all reached there and slept as soon as we had our snacks. Around 9 p.m., I woke up. I went out and had a look at the woods. I was fond of that silence. Also, I remember my dad and I had constructed a wood house that was a little deep into the woods. That night, I don't know what got into me, but I was missing our little wood house. My parents were still asleep and there was no one to accompany me, so I decided to walk alone. I started walking into the woods. Since I had gone there some more times before with my dad, I knew the route. I kept on walking in the same direction until I reached there. It was built a little high from the ground over two crossed branches. I climbed up there and went in. It was completely filled with dust and spider webs as no one ever came here after we left. I cleaned the sleeping bench which my dad and I had constructed to lie down for some time and lay there. I stayed there for about half an hour and kept on thinking about the memories I had at that place with my dad and grandpa also when he was alive. I was lying there alone, not having any fear at all. All of a sudden, I heard some noise. I got up from the bench and sat down. I cleared my mind and focused on the noise. At first, it felt like some small-sized animal roaming here and there, but within a few seconds, that noise turned out to be like footsteps. I was also getting some smoking smell. I understood that someone had sneaked into the woods without our permission. I went to the window and peeped through it. I saw a man who was dressed like a prisoner and was having a rod covered in blood. Thanks to the full moon light, I was able to see almost every detail, even if it was dark outside. His clothes were torn from several places and he was breathing heavily. All of a sudden, he got furious and started striking the rod against the trees in front of him. I got a little scared after watching his ferocity. That time, I knew I was in great danger, and if he would find that I was here, then he would definitely kill me to lose his rage. I sat there in the corner and covered my mouth with my hands so that he couldn't even hear me breathing. I was completely frightened and was shaking from head to toe. He started walking ahead, and I started thinking about whether I should stay or run from there. At first, I thought that I should stay hidden here in the wood house, but something in my brain told me to run and run as fast as I could or I may never make it out of those woods. I peeped again through the window, ensured that he was not around me, and I climbed down and started to run. But I knew whoever he was might be nearby, so I tried to run as quietly as possible. Somehow, I was trying to calm myself from panicking, but I knew that inside I was panicking a lot. I kept turning and looking over my shoulder and didn't stop. At some point, I felt like I was being pursued, but at that point, I booked it out of there. Thankfully, I made it to my farmhouse where my parents were. I knew I was safe there, so I just sat on my door and began to think, who in the world was that man, and how did he reach here? The most important question that I was asking myself was why was he dressed like a prisoner? But there was no one who could have answered me. I had been in those woods several times before, exploring into the woods without any fear, but this time was different. I couldn't think what would have happened to me if he had seen me there. After that, I went to my room and slept. The next morning, I woke up a little late. My parents were already awake and were having their morning tea when I reached there. They asked me to join them, and I sat in front of the TV. My dad was swiping across the news channels, and suddenly, we saw familiar news. It was a piece of news from our woods. The headlines of the news were that a dangerous escaped convict was on loose, and that convict was with me in the woods. That was where the authorities had pinpointed him, and at that time, I was in the very section of the woods where he was, and even I encountered him with my very own eyes. Whatever the matter was, I was just happy that I listened to my gut feeling and ran from there. Who knows if he would have hurt me or killed me, but I am glad that I was safe and sound and with my parents. Today is my best friend's funeral. I loved the guy, and I had always thought of him more like a brother than a friend. But I haven't prepared a eulogy, nor do I know if I'll be able to say anything since my mind is a mess right now. When I first heard his wife Veronica crying over the phone call while saying that Julius was burned to death, I couldn't believe my ears. Police had found his car 24 hours after his death, but I was unable to ask for further details as I was the first suspect with a motive to murder. As the investigation started, his body was sent to forensics for autopsy and other legal stuff. But as a week passed by and they still did not hand over the corpse to the family, Julius's wife started to insist that she wanted his body back to hold her husband's funeral. The way she saw it was that her beloved's corpse was being disrespected even after his death, and she couldn't withstand watching the body lying in the morgue's freezer when it should be resting in his grave. She worked hard to get the approval of her requests and pleaded more than you can imagine. Finally, after a lot of supplication, she was allowed to take the body with her as they had already taken the samples needed for forensic investigation. For some reason, this little stunt of Veronica made her the focus of the law's eyes, and she became the prime suspect in the crime as they thought she was trying to hide something by this. However, she did not pay much attention to that and asked me to come to his funeral and pay my respects, not just as his friend, but as Julius's business partner as well. I had already decided that whatever assets he owned in our failed business would be given to Veronica as she was his life partner. And, since it was impossible for me to turn her down, I accepted her invitation and helped her arrange the funeral for my best friend. Now that I'm reminded of our memories together, it doesn't seem like much time had passed since the two of us were studying business majors together in college. It was during the third year when he fell for Veronica. He had a gifted mind for business, and if given the chance, he could surpass anyone, while I was more of a hardworking individual. There were frequent times when the two of us would just come up with ideas together and discuss business. And then finally the day arrived when we pursued at least one of them. Since we did not have much funding, we were only able to start up a small business, but we had faith in ourselves that we would be able to make it big. Julius was innovative. He found out about the Shark Tank and started to insist that we go on their show and showcase our business idea. I never really believed in that television stuff, as I knew most of what they show is scripted, and even if it was real, there was no way anyone was fool enough to invest in us, as our business was about eco-friendly car batteries based on solar energy and gas. It was hard enough as it was, as we were giving it our all to try and make it a success, but it was not easy to combine technology and nature, although all the technology already exists has similar factors. Still, I was not confident in our little business plan, but Veronica persuaded me with such a heartfelt speech that I had no other choice but to go. She was an ambitious girl from the beginning, and I had always respected her for that. My friend added an upgrade to our business idea, and we went to the Shark Tank with that. I couldn't believe it when they showed interest in investing in us. It was a nice feeling I got when they liked our idea, saying it was pretty unique, and they would like to take a risk with us. With the help of their investment, we became some big shots all of a sudden as our business started to skyrocket. I was content with this success, but Julius was still not satisfied with it, and he wanted to add more upgrades so the business could grow more. He shared his well-thought plan with me, and if it was to be put in motion, the company was going to take a downfall at the first step. But with the second step, it would become even more successful than it already was. He asked me to keep it a secret from his girlfriend since he was about to propose to her, but he was scared if she were to find out about this, she might reject him. I did as he wanted me to and kept my mouth sealed. The two of them ended up getting married within 3 months, and as he was enjoying his newly married life, I was only focused on saving our company and was working harder than anyone. He slowed down after marriage as if he was not even interested in work anymore, and as a result, a lot of burdens and responsibilities fell onto my shoulders. One day as I was smoking outside the company's gate while sitting on a bench, he approached me, asked for a smoke, and sat next to me. It was a bit shocking since I'd never seen him smoke before, and was surprised thinking how and when he started doing something he used to hate. But watching him smoke consecutively, it seemed as if he was turning into a heavy smoker. I guess something might have bothering him. I wanted to ask what was going on in his life, but I couldn't bring myself to open my mouth. Still, I was worried about my brother. A week went by, and one day his wife came crying to my office and told me that Julius was not in his right mind. At first, I couldn't understand what to think of that sentence, but as she told me about the frequent fights that had been going on due to her recent pregnancy, I understood what might have happened. Even before his marriage, he had shared his thoughts about how he wanted to wait before starting a family. Veronica told me that she was 1 month pregnant, but when Julius found out, he showed his displeasure while saying he wanted to wait at least 2 years for a child. As she did not want to abort her unborn child and wanted to keep it, the two of them started to fight. She wanted me to talk to him and see if I would be able to change his mind about the matter. Even though it was not my place to meddle in their personal life, I still mustered up the courage and talked to him. Finally, after a long talk, I was able to convince him to keep the child and told him if he was worried about finances, we had enough savings to go through the loss. He went home after that, and by the looks of it, he seemed somewhat relieved. After reaching home, the first thing he did was apologize to his wife for his past behaviors and give her a long, passionate kiss. He arranged a romantic late-night dinner for her, and since she was having a pregnancy craving for ice cream, she asked him to go and get some for her, to which he agreed. He took the car keys and headed out, and he might have reached half a mile when he noticed something was wrong with his car as the brakes were not working. Even though he tried to slow it down, but for some reason he couldn't, and the only option that was left for him now was to jump off Classic right. That was why I was so confused when I heard the news of his death, and I couldn't understand why he did not jump off. How in the world did he got burned if his car crashed into a tree? He probably would have survived if he had jumped before the impact. A man of his caliber died in an accident for some reason. It seemed as if it was a planned murder, and it was a shocker for everyone who heard of this. Veronica was arrested after his funeral as it was proved in forensic reports that the wine he drank before driving was spiked and the drug mixed in it made him lose his senses. So when he got in the car, he couldn't step on the brakes while mistaking that it was not working. He probably rammed his car into a tree thinking it would stop, but before he could step out of the car, it blew up, causing him to burn to death. Investigators came to my house several times for statements and questioning, and I told them everything I knew. I also added that Veronica asked me to give half of the company assets to her and showed them the papers that I had ready for the transfer. They were able to put all the puzzle pieces together, and finally, she was arrested for her husband's alleged murder. Well, to be honest, I told them everything while excluding a few minor details such as how I was the one who planted the dinner idea into his mind. And it was also me who handed him that wine to try and show effort to Veronica to make it up to her. There's more. I was the only one who knew of his plan to make the company a success within 2 years. But when he said he was going to sell his shares to secure that baby's future, I lost my mind. There was no way the plan would have worked with half the company assets gone. So I came up with a plan. Everything went perfectly, and just as I had thought, Veronica became the suspect. And as I prepared to transfer Julius's share to her name, it became the final piece of the puzzle put together to deflect the suspicion from me to Veronica. Now, I have successfully committed a perfect crime where someone else is paying for it while I got the company, and its success all for myself. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Years back, when I was still smoking pot, I decided to head back to my friend's house up the road, which was close to 4 miles. My car wasn't working, but man, I really needed to get high. So I started hiking down the main road from my parents' house to my friend's house. I was maybe halfway there when a car pulled up next to me. A man in the driver's seat said, "I'll take you wherever you want to go." Being a naive young kid, I agreed, and as soon as I got in the car, I thought the stranger's vibe coming from him, like he wanted to put his greasy fingers on me. The interior of his car was a mess: old paper cups, discarded McDonald's bags, cigarette boxes. Yet the passenger seat was rather spotless, as if he was expecting to have someone ride with him. The conversation that took place began pleasantly, but took an odd turn. So we had in our, a friend's house going to have some fun. Yeah, I like to have fun. To mind if I party with you guys? Oh, I'm sorry, but he doesn't like strangers visiting. Ah, too bad. The rest of the car ride was quiet and only lasted maybe 10 minutes. He stopped in front of my friend's house and I shook his hand. He was clammy and sweaty. I stepped out, went inside, and didn't see him again. Until 6 months later, when I was watching a news report on the TV and saw my ride being sentenced to 8 life terms. The man that gave me the ride was none other than Ronald Domine. To add some context, Ronald J. Dominique confessed to murdering 23 men over 9 years and dumping their body in sugarcane field ditches and small by us in 6 southeast Louisiana parishes. His reason for killing: he didn't want to return to jail after raping the men.